Hello and welcome to the Novel Creature Network. We are here live with the Leslye Penelope, and I am so excited. So I might get a little tongue tied today. I'm a huge fan of your work. If you haven't read her work before, she is the author of Monsters We Defy. It's one of my favorite books. She also has Savage City and is it Beastly Kingdom?
Beastly Kingdom, that's the second book in the trilogy, yeah.
Oh, yes, and, just a huge, wonderful backlist of amazing fantasy that you don't wanna miss. So, if you are in the comments, please say or if you're here with us today, please say hello in the comments, and we'll shout you out, but thank you so much for coming, and being a part of, the Novel Creature Network today. I am super excited to have you on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, so you are our feature for the month of October for the book club, the Novel Creature Book Club. And everybody kind of just gets to choose their own adventure. And your books have given us like three pathways of just amazing material to get lost into. So for my avid readers, you've got like so many, you can just adventure into all of them, sample all. But, before we get into your work, I'm just so fascinated and happy to have you here, but can you tell us how did you get started? Um, how did you get into writing? Tell us about your writing journey.
Sure. So I've always written. My bio says I've been writing since I could hold a pen, and I really have. Like my mom was a teacher, and she taught me to write really. She taught me to read really young, and so then I was reading, and I wrote my first story when I was 5 years old in first grade, and it really ever since then. So it was all about literary magazines in like middle school and high school and college, and then I actually helped to found a literary magazine as an adult, and we ran that for a little while. And so writing was always a part of me. I didn't want to major in creative writing because I didn't think that that would be a good career at the time. So I majored in film, which is not any more practical really, but there's practical applications because I got a job as a tape dubber, as an editor, and then I wrote mostly for myself until I was um, in my early 30s, I guess. And that's when, I got married and we moved away and I was taking these writing classes because I worked from home and it was just a way to meet other people. And I got into writing so that other people could read it. Because when you're in a writing workshop, you give a few pages every week and someone expects it. And it forced me to actually continue and to keep writing for other people. And after that experience, I started believing that I could write a novel, maybe, because novels were overwhelming. Like I was writing short stories and poetry, and I just didn't understand how people wrote a whole novel. Like, didn't make any sense to me. But eventually I tried it and I failed a couple times. I tried Nano and I failed a few times. And then I finally succeeded. Um, and then, yeah, that book didn't go anywhere. But I eventually wrote Song of Blood and Stone, which was my first book. And I decided that I was going to self publish it.
That's awesome. And I love to hear how oh, and Written in Melanin's here. Hey, thanks for tuning in. It's just so wonderful to hear how you got into writing and kind of your journey because, like, I'm sure you're aware of that statistic that says, like, practically everyone wants to write a book, and only a small percentage even start, and then
Mhm.
even a smaller percentage of that actually do it. And so I always love hearing how successful art authors, how authors we love, how they began their journey, and so that's inspiring to hear. And do you still have or do you remember some of your work from, like, when you were in school, like your first story that you finished?
Yeah, I actually have the a hard copy. I mean, it was like a little book with illustrations. I mean, book. It was like a page folded in half that I wrote and called a book. But, I do have that. And actually, I moved recently and I was looking through all of my files. I have a bunch of short stories from high school that I'm
Wow.
afraid to read. Like, I wanna go back and read them because I remember vaguely some of them, but I have to, like, build up the courage to actually go back and read that stuff.
I understand that, because like, it can go one of 2 ways, like, "Wow, this is better than I wrote that?" Like, "Wow." Or
Yeah.
it can be like, "Oh my god, let's burn that." So
Right?
it's
Yeah, no one ever needs to see this in life.
really very inspiring, yes, I love hearing that, so you self-published your first book, Blood of Song and Stone. What was that like for you? Did you make it and, like, were you in that crowd kind of like before self-publishing really took off, and you know what I mean?
Right.
And
Yeah, I came in, so I was writing that book. I started writing it in 2013. It came out in January 2015. So it
mhm,
was a few years after sort of the first, millionaire self-publishers got everybody interested in it. And during the course of writing the book, I had been doing all this research. So I started listening to podcasts and reading blog posts from the big self-publishers of the time. And so, because I knew I wanted to do it myself, I had done other DIY things. Like I majored in film, and so I had done some independent film production. I had co-directed a documentary. Like I said, I co-founded this independent literary magazine. So I felt confident in the DIY scene. I didn't, I wasn't trying to go traditional initially. It wasn't like I had been rejected a bunch of times. It was like I think I can do this myself because. I think so many Black artists have just, sold albums out the trunk of their car, or like my
right.
professor at Howard Haile Garima, who's a filmmaker, like went around the country like showing his film, in the tradition of Oscar Micheaux, like early American Black filmmaker. So I was just like inspired by these artists who didn't want to be in the mainstream or didn't believe the mainstream there was room for them necessarily. And that's kind of what I felt too. I didn't think that traditional publishing would be interested in this story of, Black people and magic and, whatever I was writing. And I didn't want to deal with any criticism, not criticism, because I liked criticism, but I didn't want to deal with people asking me to change things and, you know,
Mhm.
so yeah, I did literally a year of research on everything from cover designers and editors and marketing while I was writing and editing the book. So I felt confident, or at least I had a bed of knowledge to go forward and to do a really, professional product that I was proud of.
Yes. So Written in Melanin says, yes, I love that mindset because it's so rare to hear. It's not about rejection. And I do think this is huge. I'm so glad you said that because a lot of times, people think, oh, you're just self publishing because you've got rejected so many
Yeah.
times. But no, it's like you said, it's about being kind of in charge of the process, wanting to do
Mhm.
it yourself. And I think it's important to understand that, like, with self-publishing, a lot of because especially in today's time, a lot of the things that are available to traditional publishers, we do have access to. You just need kind of like the funds, or
Mhm.
you have to kind of navigate through that. But we do have access, and we can create, which you have shown, amazing self-published works. So thank you so much for bringing that out.
Yeah, thanks.
And then Written in Melon, also says, "Oh wow, high school." Right?
I know. Yeah. It's like I'm gonna build up the courage one day to read these stories and never show anyone, I'm sure. But maybe I'll be proud of myself and maybe I'll be like, well, I sure have grown, like have the positive spin on like, look where I came from.
Definitely, definitely. And if it turns out that they're better than you thought, maybe you can share them on your podcast. I am a, for those who don't know, Leslye has a amazing podcast that you should definitely tune into. Check out her YouTube channel and subscribe. It's My Imaginary Friends.
Yes, that's
Can you
fantastic.
tell us about that? Like, when did you start? Because along with, well, just get into your whole writing journey. So you started with A Song of Blood and Stone, correct?
Right.
And then, like, what happened after that? Like, did it immediately kind of take off, or how did you build that?
Yeah, so January 2015, that book came out, and I decided it was going to be a series. And so that first year that I published, I actually did 4 books in 2 series because I had learned how to write a little faster. And there's a whole, it's still common now that, write more, publish more, and people will come. So my goal with the first book, because I'd heard that, the average self-publisher doesn't sell 200 copies. So
Mhm.
200 copies was the goal. I would feel successful when I did that. And I did that. I did that within a few months. So it wasn't like a juggernaut, but it was like building. And I was super happy because these are people I didn't know. They weren't my family and like, beyond my family and friends. I don't know 200 people. So that made me feel like, okay, I've got something here. I can keep going and build the momentum and, putting into practice the marketing things that I was researching and networking, all this, doing all the things. So a year later, so there were 2 books in that series that had come out that year, and then 2 books in a different series. In January of 2016, I had gone through Book Life, which is the way that self-publishers can, I know, right? 4 books a year. Yeah, that didn't happen again. So 4 books in 2 series is an anomaly. But you can submit your book to get a review in Publishers Weekly, the trade magazine, as an indie. And I did that, and I actually got a starred review. And that brought in a little bit of attention. And I also found out that the Song of Blood and Stone had won this award from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. And so at that point, it was all happened in the same month. The third thing that happened was I got an email through my website email form from an editor at St. Martin's Press, who Monique Patterson, who's actually a Black woman editor. And she, you were asking about the site to get a Publishers Weekly review is Book Life. I think it's booklife.com. Or if you just Google Book Life Publishers Weekly, you can submit for free. There's a paid version, which I don't recommend. But if you submit for free, they do have to choose you. So when you pay, you get an automatic review. But I'm not really a fan of the paid reviews. Yeah. But they look at everyone who submits for free and they choose certain books to review. And so anybody can do that now. It's open. It's a great service, opportunity to have. So yeah, I'd gotten this email from this editor at St. Martin's who had read the two books in the Earthsinger Chronicles series, which is Song of Blood and Stone and Whispers of Shadow and Flame. And she initially asked me about what else I was working on, to pitch her something new. So I took a few months and I pitched her something new because I didn't know how to write a pitch. I didn't know what a book proposal was. I had to do research on that. And she came back to me just as I think I had just either sent or gotten back copy edits on book 3 that I was going to publish, when she was like, I really loved, Earthsinger Chronicles, and I think that I could find a wider audience for it if we republish it, which is not the usual thing. Like you hear that publishers don't want to republish things that were already in the marketplace. So I
Yes.
wasn't expecting that at all. And yeah, I agreed to do that. It would seem like a really good opportunity, even though it wasn't something that I had initially thought about. And like we said, I chose to self-publish, but the opportunity came and I was like, well, if more people can read the books, I can always self-publish other things. Like if this is a horrible disaster and they ask me to change everything and the things that I was afraid of came to pass, I'm writing more. I know I can always publish more. So I'll give this a chance. So we actually took off the two books that were on the market, and I never published that third one that I had the cover for. I had the copy edits for. Like I spent money to get the third book out there. Um, and then a year later, Song of Blood and Stone in 2018, actually. So it took actually a year and a half. It was
Wow.
traditional publishing is a very long process, which if you're used to self-publishing is frustrating. But yes, and then Song of Blood and Stone came out again in hardcover in 2018, and then every year after that, the rest of the 4 books in the series came out. And I kept the rights so that I could self-publish novellas in between the novels. That was important to me too. So
Yes.
I was continuing to publish like prequel novellas in between each of the novels.
That
And
is awesome.
yeah.
That is awesome. And it says a lot about, because this was your first published series
Mhm.
and you self-published it, it hit the kind of like the mark for, what you were aiming for. You hit that. But I think what's important that you said earlier is that you took a whole year to kind of like immerse yourself into, the world of self-publishing to see what it was all about. So that makes me, one of the questions I have for you, because you've written in the past, you've had short stories, you've done, you have such an amazing build up, and it's just so inspiring. What made A Song of Blood and Stone the book for you to finish and to share with the world?
That's a good question, yeah, because I had been working on at least 2 other novels before that,
Mhm.
that didn't ever get finished. Um, it was just a stroke of inspiration, actually. Like, I had gone to a workshop, a week-long workshop, with Vona Voices, which is a workshop for authors of color, and I think they do, like, week-long. They used to do it at Berkeley, at, University of California, Berkeley. They think they at different universities, and so I had the opportunity to do that workshop, and I was just filled with inspiration about being with other authors and having that community. Community is also extremely important in my, the success that I've had is just having a community of writers to fall back on. Um, but I came back from that week in Berkeley, just a story idea came to me, and I wrote it. I wrote the first draft really, really quickly. And so it just felt like I had the beginning and the middle and the end for the first time. And I hadn't necessarily had that for the other books in progress that I had been working on. And it just felt like it was everything I loved. and I wanted to work on it. It had so much energy behind it. So some stories you're kind of just, tootling around with, and you work on them and they're nice, and then you just hit with the thing. And I don't know where it comes from, if you believe in the muse or some sort of divine intervention or whatever, that it felt like, oh, I like this. I'm immersed in this. I'm going to spend the next year and a half of my life writing and working on it, that's how long it took me for that first book. And a lot of times it takes longer, but yeah, it's hard to explain. It came to me. It felt like it had so much energy behind the idea when it arrived in my brain.
That's awesome. So, and obviously, I think the passion behind that story translated because you won awards for it. And this was, again, your first book, and it resonated with readers. And this is a 4-book series, right? It's
Mhm.
totally epic. If you see the original covers, if you see the newer covers, it's just the covers are what like really when I see us on the covers, it's an automatic
Right.
buy for me. So can
Yeah.
we talk about your covers too before we dive into kind of like the meat of what your stories are about? Like what I know with traditional publishing and self-publishing, it's kind of like a different ball game on like how much
Mhm.
space you get with covers. But how did you come up with your covers that you design? And then what was your experience like when you worked with the traditional route when they did your cover design? Did you get to like have say so, or how did that work?
So with my indie covers, when I did the deal, yeah, the original hardcover is gorgeous. When I did the deal, they used my self-published cover for the hardcover of Song of Blood and Stone. They
Mm.
just changed the color a little bit. So the year of research that I had done included cover designers. And one of my requirements for a cover designer, I wanted to get the Photoshop file, but I wanted someone who really understood the genre. And so the cover designer that I used for my indie stuff, Bookfly Design, he worked in traditional publishing and then went out on his own and now does all indie covers. And his work is just amazing. It's expensive, but it's amazing. And it was important to me that my book be indistinguishable from traditionally published books. So it worked out because when I did the deal with St. Martin's, they were like, that cover is great. We're using that just for the hardcover. So they didn't do the rest of the series in hardcover. I don't think the sales of the hardcovers were what they wanted them to be. So with the paperbacks, they were like, we're going in a different cover direction. And, my editor told me this, I didn't have any say in that, and actually didn't have any say in the designer that they chose or the covers at all. They kind of showed me them and I was like, okay, that's like, it was like, do you like this? I hope you like this. Um, and I did it. They're gorgeous. They're amazing. The one thing that I did have input into. So book 3 is Cry of Metal and Bone, and the characters have certain skin tones that I don't actually describe skin tone in the first couple of books because on purpose, and we can talk about that if you'd like to. But in the third book, there are different races in this world, and some of them are lighter skinned and some of them are darker skinned. But the lighter skinned people are still people of color. They're just lighter skinned. So the first version of the cover came back and she was just too pale. I wanted her to be just a little bit melanated, just to give a
Right.
hint. So I've adjusted on several covers the skin tone of the characters, just because I'm writing about brown people of all shades, and I just want that really reflected. But yeah, other than that, I didn't get any say in those covers. Yeah, which can be frustrating, when you're used to having the control. And I felt
Right.
like I did a good job with my self-published covers. But that's just the trade-off that you have. You're working with professionals who are doing a good job. I mean, there's plenty of horror stories. I haven't had any horror stories yet, like knock on wood. I've adored all of the covers I've had from my traditional publishers.
Yeah, just hats off to you because I do want to address that because I think it's important when it comes to representation. So, you can you tell us, especially for readers who are just kind of being introduced to your work, what type of style, what type of things do you want your readers to walk away knowing about your work overall?
So I do write in different subgenres. I have some Earthsinger Chronicles is more epic fantasy romance, like strong romantic threads in all of the books. I write paranormal romance. Monsters We Defy is historical fantasy with like a little love story in there. And the books that are coming out. So they're different aspects of fantasy and paranormal. But they all have people of color, mostly black people or brown people and analogs to us in other worlds. But and they're also they've been called socially conscious or socially aware. And I'm trying not to be preachy necessarily. I want to tell an entertaining story. I want people to read about adventure and love and all of these things that we can escape into. But I also want to ground it in our experience of the real world. And I love how fantasy and science fiction allow you to hold up a mirror to our world. And, I like to say it's like without the baggage. So I can talk about like a refugee crisis. I can have what is essentially a law enforcement shooting of a young, brown boy in my book. And it's not our world, it's not our cops, so it's a little bit removed from our baggage, but it's still the same thing. And it's still confronting, the real life issues of the day through a fantasy lens, through a fictional lens. That my hope is that people will, no matter what your background or race is, you can sort of see the humanity in these characters and maybe help create some empathy for real people.
Definitely. And I think having those real characters, those characters that feel like real people, which I think you do so, so well. Like you took, and I'm going to hop a little bit. I read Monsters We Defy, and you took a story, a clip from like from a headline, and you fleshed a whole character out and built this amazing, fantastical world. How do you do that? Like, I mean, it's just this is just fantastic. How what was that like to just be inspired by like just a snippet or an
Yeah.
article and to just like flesh out an entire character, based on a real person and like
Yeah.
it was just so immersive. I felt like I was stepping in her shoes. So I think you've definitely done a good job with kind of creating characters that you can not empathize with, but you can connect to in such a way where like you almost feel like part of the story.
Thank you. Yeah, The Monsters We Defy, came about because I wanted to write a heist that took place in the Harlem Renaissance era, but I didn't know anything else, so I did the research. And in the research, I found this real life person, Carrie Johnson, from 1919, from, Red Summer, from the riots in DC. And then it was like, I wanted to be in DC. I wanted to be and specifically her story, reminded me of Breonna Taylor's. So she was shot by police in her home, in her bedroom. Now, Carrie Johnson shot back. And so that in and of itself just sparked something. It was like, and she was 17 at the time. This was during the 1919 riots in DC. And it was just an amazing story that she lived to tell the tale. She was not killed by any by the police or the white people or anything. She went to jail for a while and then she got out. And the parallels between 1919 and I guess 2020 was when Breonna Taylor was killed, right? 100 years, a lot has changed, obviously, but there are these threads, these parallels. And so what would it take for the 17-year-old girl? What was her life like? I just was like up at night, like thinking about her once I read her story, and we don't know what happened to her. And I was like, what happened to her? And so I imagined what happened to her. And I actually did a lot of research trying to figure it out. And I think I might have found her, but I wasn't 100% sure. And she was just a character that just came to me like, okay, this person seemed like that was such a impactful, amazing occurrence that happened in her life. And yeah, so I created Clara, the main character of The Monsters We Defy, based on this real person. And so then I was in DC, where I went to Howard. I grew up in Maryland for the most part. My family's from DC. I know DC pretty well. And so the sense of place was probably because it's a place that I know well. And I even though I know it well, I didn't know it in 1925. So I actually did a lot more research to learn the 1925 version of the city that I know, and imagining what life must have been like for Black people in this all Black neighborhood. And then kind of bringing these characters to life just through like what putting myself back there, this thinking like, where would they go to the grocery store? Like, what do they cook for dinner? What is hair care like in 1925 when you're Black? Like, what are you doing with your hair? And all aspects of life I was trying to bring alive in this, and then adding fantasy, adding powers, magic, spirits, um, this whole other layer of the world on top of that. So if it works for people, I'm happy to hear that it does. It's just because, I really put myself in the place of the characters and tried to, like, holistically, I'm thinking about little things, like research helps a lot. I'll just say one more thing. I read Langston Hughes' autobiography, and because he had lived in DC, and he actually is in the book. And I was like, once I found out the times matched up, I worked really hard to make sure that I could get him in there in a time when he actually worked at the place that I have him working in the book. But in his autobiography, he was talking about living in this 2-room cold water apartment. Like I think he didn't have heat or something, or he had water but no hot water and no heat. And I was like, what is that like? So that things like that, when you look at them, you're like, what how do these people live? DC gets cold, you know? So the details, I guess my point is to wrap it up. Um, Finding the little details and then expanding upon that and then putting myself in that place helps so much when you're trying to do something like that.
I think that's awesome. And I don't want to like eat up all your time. I know we have viewers here and some, amazing people who will view later. So guys, if you have any questions in the comments, please let us know, because we have a gem here with us today. But I do have a question for all my novel creature listeners and viewers. What Leslye Penelope book is on your TBR or would you recommend that you've read? Let us know in the comments and we'll try to get more questions on that particular work, if you're interested in. So I'll leave that up. But so we've talked a little bit about like your first series, A Song of Blood and Stone, and you've just kind of really immersed us in the world of the monsters we defy. But if you were to, because I look at us as authors as a kind of like a tour guide. You're introducing people into brand new worlds. And, a good tour guide will talk about, like the attractions. But also they'll talk about the holes in the walls and the local legends and all the little the fine points to really kind of invite people into the world that they're visiting. So if you were a tour guide for your world, Savage City,
Hmm.
how would you introduce it to our readers here today?
Savage City came about. I it was Okay, how do I explain this? It takes place in an alternate San Francisco, in an alternate world version of San Francisco. And I lived in the Bay Area for graduate school, so I adore the Bay Area. And so I wanted to do something with shifters, but a different version of shifters. So I love paranormal romance, and I can't exactly remember why, but the tour would be if you're in this dystopian post-apocalyptic version of San Francisco where shifters have taken over, and they took over the Trans-America Pyramid, and that is where they live now. And there are dragons, and people shift into all different animals, but there are two clans. So one clan actually turns into the animal. The other clan takes on the animal's properties. And so if they are a bird shifter, they don't transform into a bird, but they can just fly. And I just wanted to do something that was a little bit different than I had seen before. And it sort of explored this sort of inner battle between these two creatures. And also the first book, Savage City, so it's a trilogy. The first book is also about the nature of evil and love. And I'm very rarely ever interested in writing about pure villains. I like it when the villain is the hero of their own story, when the villain has
Yes.
shades. And so for that book, it was really that's what motivated me. That was the thing I was most interested in, this tyrannical king. So, that is who loves his daughter. And that's at the core of that story. So yeah,
Awesome. That's a pitch all in itself, a tyrannical king who loves his daughter. I
right.
think we all love a good villain.
Right.
So we've got a couple comments in the chat. So We Love Listen says, Savage City. So we're talking about that a little bit. Written in Melanin loves A Song of Blood and Stone. Yes, and I have this one on my bookshelf. I just haven't gotten to it, but I love The Monsters We Defy. Um, Janine, this one we're talking about Savage City right now. So yeah, so would you classify Savage City kind of like a portal fantasy?
Yes,
Well,
it's a
that
portal fantasy meets paranormal romance. So genre blend.
yeah, so I love that. I love where you can just like kind of be taken away into different worlds from our own ordinary mundane world.
Mhm.
And like romance is laced. So here's a question for you before we get to some of our questions, because we do have some. It seems like romance is laced throughout your works in different degrees.
Mhm.
So I know there's some of us who like spicy, there's some of us who like slow burn. What would you recommend for the different types of readers? Do you write, would you say you have spicy in your books, or are they slow burn? How would you
I'm
class?
not much of a slow burn writer, because most of mine, the ones that are I consider actual romances, it's like one couple in each book. So there might be a little variation about how quickly it happens. I don't think that I would call it slow burn, but so Earthsinger Chronicles, most of those are open door. I would say like a medium heat level, and Savage City is probably like a medium to medium low heat level. The Monsters We Defy, there's no sex in that book. So it's not a romance, it's a fantasy with a love story in it. And then I have another series which is Angel Born and Angel Fall, the Eternal Flame. And those are also contemporary paranormal romances that, yeah, I don't really go much beyond a medium heat level. I do like to have in my romances a little bit of heat, but yeah.
So, guys, that's out there. We've got some amazing worlds to view and to go through. Let's see. Written in Melanin does have a question for you. What story has been the most fun for you to write, and which one has shaped you as an author the most? This is a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. The most fun. It's a hard one. I think it's either Monsters or Song of Blood and Stone. Because the first one, probably the Monsters, because Song was fun, but it was also my first book, and there
Mhm.
was a lot of emotion and doubt wrapped up in it. Like, can I do this? The first draft was so quick, and then I did many revisions for many months. Whereas the Monsters We Defy, I was challenging myself to write a heist. I had never written a heist. Everyone loves heists, right? Like I felt like people would, and when I told people I'm writing a heist, they're like, "Ooh, when can I read this?" And I'm like, "I don't know, I'm not done yet." But and then in terms of which one has shaped me as an author the most, that's also a really good question. I'm going to have to say Requiem of Silence, which is the fourth book in the Earthsinger Chronicles. And if you make it all the way to the fourth, at that point, you've read, I don't know, 500,000, 600,000 words of the story. But I had set up this conflict in this series, so it's four novels, three novellas, and novellas are optional, but they give you information. But I had to wrap it up in the fourth book. And it was a racial conflict. It was a conflict between people who, one people had magic, one people didn't, and they're different races. And there's 500 years of hatred and animosity. And it's like, how do I solve racism in the last book? Obviously, I can't do that. But I had to come to a conclusion that felt right for the story, that felt cathartic for me as an author, that I hope is cathartic for the readers. And I think I grew a lot doing that. It caused me to dive into what do I believe in terms of how do I believe human beings can solve their conflicts, and how do I put that on the page in a way that is, not like Pollyanna-ish, is realistic, is a little bittersweet, but it still felt right. So I think that really shaped me a lot.
That's awesome. That's an awesome question. Thank you so much for that, Written in Melanin. And then we have another one here. Let's see. Which of your books would you recommend for teen readers?
I think The Monsters We Defy is good for all ages. There's a couple of cuss words and that's it. There's nothing, I don't think it's too scary. I don't know. Let me know what y'all think. But the other stuff, I would say older teens are fine reading any of my books if, who knows what teenagers are reading, but like 16 and up is probably good for any of them.
Yeah, and I'm gonna can we talk a little bit about the world building for Monsters We Defy? Because even though it has a spooky element, you've got like ghosts, you've got like forms of demons and different things in there. It's really like immersive and interesting in the way that you built like your kind of your supernatural system. Can you talk about like the types of creatures and what kind of inspired that, and just how you develop that, because it's really immersive and it's not like something I've seen before.
Yeah, so for The Monsters We Defy, since I was setting it in our world, it wasn't a secondary fantasy world. It's real Washington, D.C. And I wanted, when we're thinking about this real person who I found, I was like, how did she get out of jail after, it's not a spoiler, I don't think, to say that she had been in jail for killing this white police officer. And in real life, she got out. I was like, was magic involved? That's the only thing, that's like the first thing that came to me. So, and I had grown up, reading like Gloria Naylor was one of my favorite authors, and reading like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker, and they're all using, and even like Tina McElroy Ansa, using sort of Black folk magic, either hoodoo, conjure, root work. Those things are infused in so much of the Black women American writers that I grew up reading. And so I wanted to have that in this book. I wanted to base my magic system on this, Black folk magic kind of thing. So I came up with the idea that Clara was born with a call, which in many cultures around the world, I found out actually means people believe that they have psychic powers. And so that was the beginning of the magic system. And then bringing in like a version of hoodoo or conjure. So there are spirits in the Monsters We Defy, and certain characters can not only communicate with the spirits, they make deals with the spirits. And using, they get a charm, which is a good power, and a trick, which is the other side of the coin. It always has to be balance. And that's present not only in our belief systems, but like belief systems all around the world. It felt very relatable. But yeah, I wanted to do a version of hoodoo or conjure that was my own. So I was doing some research, but it's so different all over the country. And then there's, the African diaspora has brought similar concepts from West Africa all over the world and all over, North and South America. And so there's not like one way to do it right anyway. Even if you were trying to, it's going to be very regional, and taking stories from my family, things my grandmother told me and things her grandmother told her, and mixing it up and creating this idea of this, over there, this spirit world where the spirits exist, and maybe they don't want to stay there, and there's different kinds of spirits. So there are the more powerful ones, like the ones that the humans make the deals with and give the humans powers. And then there's, just like other less, like more amorphous spirits, I guess you could say, with different agendas, if you could even call it that. So that was the basis and the background. And yeah, just trying to ground it. This is because it was taking place in our world. I wanted it to feel very grounded, but still have that magical aspect that is based in our culture.
And I think it's really neat because the charms and the tricks that your characters have were like really telling of their personalities, of their
Mhm.
own journeys. And so I think that was a beautiful way to kind of like, like you were talking about, talk about like issues that we may have here real in the real world, but you have that buffer, that fantastical buffer where you can kind of explore that. So I really love that. But too,
Thank
like
you.
your other works have some amazing magical elements in it too. Like when you brought up Savage City, you mentioned dragons, and we all love dragons. So
Right.
can you talk about the elements for how that works, and explore kind of like the world building for that as well.
Hmm. Yeah. So in Savage City, Um, yeah, like I said, I wanted to do a different version of Shifters, and I was inspired in part by, I always forget the name of the book, The Golden Compass, which a lot of people love. So they have the idea of the daemon, and in that book and series, there are animal spirits, or the idea of animal familiars, and that shifters are kind of like a version of animal familiars. But in my world, these animal familiars are actually spirits. They're called daemons, and people, when they become adults, they go through a ceremony, and they join with one of these spirits. So if you are a dragon, you can turn into a dragon. That's because you have a dragon daemon who sort of joins with you, and the spirits want to experience the material world. So they give the people powers, either the ability to transform, or in the other clan, the ability to take on the power. And then sometimes they give additional powers like healing, foresight, traditional magical abilities, if they don't transform into animals.
That's
And yeah, it was just like a combination of things that I thought were cool, and that I wanted, and I hadn't seen it before together and wanted to see. And that's a lot of times it comes down to like, oh, I think this would be cool. Let me see if I can pull this off.
You've got great instinct because like it's just an amazing buildup of wonderful, amazing stories. And so with that, because like all the characters that you have on page are like you don't waste any of your characters. So along the lines of kind of like, Written and Mellon had asked like what was most fun to write. But what character most resonates with you? Like from the side characters, the main characters, what characters have most resonated with you?
That is a good question. I have my favorite characters. I think just Jasminda, who is the heroine of Song of Blood and Stone. My first book. I think your first books are always a little autobiographical, And so I'm not biracial, but she's biracial. But I had the experience of, that sort of double consciousness of living in two worlds. I grew up in, almost all white schools. At a certain point, I was the only Black person in the entire school, in elementary school for two different
Wow.
schools. And
Wow.
so that was very foundational for me, kind of living in both of these worlds. And even later on, there were only like 10% Black students in my high school. And so, yeah, growing up with that experience, and it just made Jasmine very relatable to me in terms of, she's a character who is biracial. She's an orphan when we meet her. She lives in a country with, a parent that she does not look like. So she's always assumed to be the enemy because they are at war. These two countries are at war. And she's one of the only biracial people for, very unique reasons. So yeah, that is why I kind of gravitated towards her. And she'll always have a very special place in my heart because I was writing that experience from like a core of my own and fantasticalizing them, if that's a word.
I love it. So yeah, that totally makes sense. And I mean, these characters, I just love it. When you have good characters and you've got that world building, I mean, guys, if you haven't read her books, please pick up Monsters We Defy, pick up Savage City, pick up all of them, pick up Blood and Stone. Like I said, the ones that I haven't read are on my shelf. I'm really excited. You have such a wonderful backlist, and I highly recommend. We have another question. Which book would you want to get adapted, and which style TV, film, or miniseries? Yeah, because these you definitely got a lot of great material that's TV worthy, movie worthy.
So I can tell you that I have had things optioned. Now, nothing's been announced, so there's no like official announcement that I'm allowed to give. But I think that, I think the Ursula Chronicles would make a great television show. There's so much material there. Like I said, there's 7 books total if you can count the novellas.
I can see that.
And I think that would be great. I think any book ideally would be like a limited series, like a single book. If Monsters We Defy was like a 6 episode, limited series, that would be very cool too.
Okay, but with that though, like what platform would you like to see it on? Like, would you like
Yeah.
it to go Hulu, Netflix, Amazon?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I mean any Netflix and Amazon seem to be doing really good work. I mean Hulu has good shows too. Apple TV has good shows. But
They
I
do.
they do attack. And the problem with Netflix is that they cancel everything very quickly. So I would hate to like get excited and then, oh, one season, you're done. And they're very good for that. So maybe I think Amazon might give things more time, or maybe a Hulu if we're talking like a television series. Yeah.
And you're in good company there because they have, what's that one? The Wheel of Time, they just did that
Right.
on
Yeah.
Amazon. They have a couple of other really, really great ones on there, so it'll be, like, amongst good company. But along that line, what inspires your work? Like, are there any authors you follow, any TV shows that you follow or recommend that really inspire your work?
I get inspiration really from everywhere. I'm trying to think if there's anything specific. Like, for example, The Monsters We Defy. I watched a lot of Leverage, which doesn't seem like it would be, but it's heist. It's every episode is a heist, and it's like a feel good, warm hug of a heist show. And I don't know, the tone is different, but I loved that. And in terms of like Mama Day by Gloria Naylor, I reread that again before I wrote Monsters because that was a direct inspiration, even though it's very literary and it's very like heady. And I'm trying to write more commercial, fiction, but still, I had adored that as a kid, and that inspired me so much. And like I like a lot of stuff, and I'll take little ideas or little moments from things as inspiration, as opposed to a whole thing. Like for Song of Blood and Stone, there is a YA series by an Australian author, and the first book is Finnegan of the Rock, and her name is Melina Marchetta, which really inspired me to try to write my secondary fantasy world. And then like the time period of that, because it's an alternate 1920s world instead of medieval, was inspired by the Scorpio races by Maggie Stiefvater, which is a fantasy that takes place in sort of a middle 20th century, but it's not specific. And I was like, I want to do that. So it's like little here, pick and choose from here and here and here and mash it up in my brain.
That's awesome. Oh, we've got some comments here. So Read Let Listen says Amazon and Apple TV are good for fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Apple TV, they just recently did, they adapted The Changeling. I
Yes.
haven't seen that,
I
but
haven't started watching it yet.
they do have some good stuff. And then Written in Melanin says that she's watching Leverage now.
Yes, and the new ones are so good, and then the original, and then I just go cycle back and forth. I could always be watching Leverage. It's always gonna make me feel good.
And I can totally see how that would work with a heist. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
'Cause I don't know, like, I'm
and
watching
the
Suits
team
now.
dynamics.
I'm watching Suits now on,
Uh,
Netflix, and I'm like, "Man, I wanna do something fantastical with that." It's just like the chemistry of certain shows
right.
kinda, like, works, and those themes that you find in there, so, yeah, I'm definitely adding Leverage to my watch list for
Absolutely.
and then Beat Love Listen wants to know, do you still think it's important to join local writing groups?
I find it has been super helpful for me, whether it's local, whether it's online. You might not be able to find something in your area, but having some kind of community is really important. Like, I know you've got this book club. I know Britain and Melanin has started a community. Like, just whatever you can find that allows you to talk to people, maybe brainstorm. Like, I was this week, or no, it was last week, in a quandary with my current work in progress. I only got out of it because I was able to talk it through with a writer friend who was like, "What about this? What about this?" So community is incredibly vital, however you can find it. And if it's in person, that's even better because we kind of need to be in person now. It's like post pandemic, it's wonderful to have in person things, but sometimes it's just not possible.
And I think it goes back to what you said earlier, how important community is. Because, like, we're taught so often, like, that writing is such a solitary process. And it is, but it doesn't have to be. Like you said, like, Written in Melanin has some amazing things. And then you have some amazing resources for writers as well, or anyone who's interested in getting involved or learning more about the process. Can you talk about My Imaginary Friends and kind of the amazing things you have going on now?
Sure. So yeah, I started the podcast called My Imaginary Friends. I think it was 2019. So it's been 4 years. I'm at episode 220 something. I don't remember what it is. And just as a way to kind of give the behind the scenes of what it's like to be an author week to week, the highs, the lows, everything in between. And then this year I started, I created a course on world building. It's called Imaginary World Building for writers who would like to get better with their world building. And that is available. It's all at myimaginaryfriends.net. And so we're in October as we are recording this. The month before NaNoWriMo, I've been doing live videos for Preptober and sort of walking people through the process that I go through when I'm planning my books, like before I get to the writing part. And we'll be doing some live write-ins during Nano. So, and I also have a newsletter for writers. It's weekly-ish, mostly weekly when I like sometimes some weeks are just really hard. But so yeah, all of that, myimaginaryfriends.net. If you're a writer and just want a peek into my brain, and I try to do the newsletter is more inspiration and the podcast also. And then yeah, teaching, and I'm starting to do some like one-on-one type of consulting too. So yeah, lots of things going on.
I'm a fan. I started your Preptober, and it's been really helpful because I'm working on 3 different works right now. So I'm like, man, let me see what's going on, and I just highly recommend it. And you have such a soothing voice on your podcast too.
Thanks.
So, like, if you're like me, guys, and you're writing and you get like really nervous, or you kind of work yourself up with that imposter syndrome and different things, tune into My Imaginary Friend, subscribe to her newsletter, and just it's amazing. I
Thank you.
highly recommend it, and I just want to thank you because, like Written in Melanin says, 200 episodes is amazing consistency. You are such an inspiration to all of us out here, from the way that you write, just following your personal journey, the advice that you give, just flowers to you. And I'm so happy that you're on here today. Like I said, I'm kind of fangirling, so
Oh, thank you. Thank you so
but
much.
yeah, like, just the body of work you have is just so amazing, and it's so inspiring to hear. Oh, Written in Melanin, leave Suits alone.
Right? I
Yeah,
watched the
she's
first
annoying.
the first couple of, seasons of Suits when it came out, and I was like, "Yeah, like, what's happening here?" It was fun, though, and this was, like, before Meghan Markle was Meghan Markle, and then we're like, "Oh,
Right.
like."
I think that's why I started watching. I'm like, well, let me see what she was on and what she was doing.
Right?
But yeah, I mean, like you're just, and that's why I was just really excited to feature you and to share kind of like the works that you've done though, because everything like you write, it just feels so magical and so cathartic. Just amazing writing. And so if we have any more questions, does anyone have any more questions in the comments, please drop them. But definitely pick up all just if you see her name on it, and there's different versions. You write under El Penelope as well, too, right?
Right, yeah. I started my self-published is all under El Penelope,
Mhm.
and, yeah, traditional publishing sometimes asks you to change your name, so they were like, "Can we do this book as Leslye Penelope?" And I'm like, "Well, people might be confused, but we'll see what happens," so I
If
do
you
both.
see Penelope on the end and it
If
starts with
there's an L and there's a Penelope, it's me.
right, because I'm so serious. Like everything you have put out has just been such an inspiration. And I can't wait to dive into your other books. And I've heard so many good things about those. So, guys, whether you are into paranormal romance with a little bit of portal fantasy, if you're looking for epic, she's got it. If you're looking for historical fantasy, she's got it. The world building is going to be amazing. The representation is just so there. Please just go add all her books to cart. It's hard to determine. Okay, here is a question for you. Which book would you recommend, or what's the first book that you always recommend to like newbie readers? So like people who are just, you know how sometimes you have a book that you feel just better resonates. I know you said like a Song of Blood and Stone kind of is like a piece of your heart. Would you recommend that for a first book to readers, or what's your favorite book to recommend from your books?
Yeah, I recommend that. It is the beginning of a series, so also offer, The Monsters We Defy is a standalone, although I do get regular requests for a sequel. At the moment, it is a standalone. Um, I think Song of Blood and Stone kind of stands on its own too. It is the beginning of a larger journey, but I think it wraps up pretty nicely. So either one of those are good starting places. Um,
I've loved all the books I've read by you. I really love the Savage City series and Earthsinger Chronicles. Yes. So
thank
again,
you.
like everything you put out is like gold, and I just have you on auto buy. So I agree with Read, Love, Listen. Um, so for the end of, we're kind of wrapping up here. I know your time is valuable, but before you go, again, thank you so much for being here. Can you share what you've got coming up? Some books that we can maybe add to our TBR, to our Goodreads list, and kind of be on the watch for, or anything else that you would love us to support and to kind of celebrate with you, because like I said, you are amazing and you deserve your flowers and all the support and love, and we want to read all that goodness.
Thank you. Well, this reminds me, I need to add it to Goodreads. The third in the trilogy for Savage City, which is Brutal Fortress. I am revising that now. I have a date. It'll go on pre-order soon, but it's going to come out in March of next year. And that's because the audiobook people want to have the audiobook at the same time. So that's coming out. And then the next book from my traditional publisher will be out next summer. It is called Daughter of the Merciful Deep, and I don't believe it's available for pre-order yet. So make sure you're on my newsletter if you would like to not miss when the pre-orders come out. But those are the two things coming out next year that I'm really excited about. Daughter of the Merciful Deep, if you're a podcast listener, it's the Black Towns book. It is, another historical fantasy, but this one is 1930s in the Deep South and an all-Black town, and I'm really excited about it because it was kind of the scariest book I've written. It's like my biggest swing, like I pushed myself to write something that scared me, and I just hope that readers love it. I love it. It's coming. I'm going to see it again in copy edits pretty soon, but yeah, it was been the most difficult so far. So, and there will be pre-order goodies for everything. So yeah, once I get myself together, I have the cover for Brutal Fortress. I've had it for a long time. I haven't done the reveal yet till I knew that I could wrap my mind around this book.
Yes. We will be waiting for that. I'm telling you, I love everything. We do have a question. Do both of them have a heavy romance? So your new books, will there be like romantic elements?
Brutal Fortress is part of the trilogy, so it is a paranormal romance, sort of portal fantasy romance. And the new historical fantasy is like the monster, so it's got a love story, but it's closed door. There's no heat on the page or anything like that. So yes, you can choose self-select what you like romance-wise.
Definitely, and I'm with Written in Melon, and I can't wait. So I'm gonna have to catch up with Savage City and everything, so I can just slide straight into that when it's coming out.
Yeah.
Um, so because, like I said, just hearing like all the nuggets of everything that you're doing, hearing about your like what inspired you to write and kind of your writing journey has been like just amazing to hear and to learn, especially as somebody who wants to write and kind of like stay inspired for my journey. But do you have any word of inspiration or like a mantra or a slogan, something that you would like to leave with viewers today to kind of inspire and empower them for their own journey?
Yeah, I mean, I really do believe that there's someone out there who needs what you're writing. Like we might not all have enormous Colleen Hoover-sized audiences, but we all have like people who will read our work and really just like need to hear that message. Whatever you have to say, someone has to hear. So that was really inspiring to me, regardless of the size of your audience. And sometimes you get frustrated, like you're not selling enough books or reaching enough people. But whoever you are reaching, like, and those people are valuable and important. And I do feel like there's a service in our creativity. There's a service in writing and telling stories that reach people. You don't know what people are going through, and books, we're book lovers. We know that books can save lives, that books can bring us out of the doldrums and the depths of despair. So yeah, like keep in mind that there is someone out there that you are writing for who really needs to read what you are writing.
I love that. That's so true, and that's something I believe too. Books can save lives, so it's amazing to hear you say that. But thank you so much for being on today. And guys, even if you aren't writers, that applies. Something that you're doing,
Mhm.
nobody else can do it, and there's somebody that needs what you have. So please stay inspired. And if you're looking for extra inspiration, and you want to scratch that reading itch, please pick up all of Leslye Penelope's books. Just add them all to cart. There is something amazing in all of them. Like I said, from epic fantasy to paranormal romance, historical fantasy, and all the wonderful things in between. If you want fantasy, this is where it's at. Subscribe to her YouTube channel, subscribe to her newsletter, and just love everything she's got here because it's all amazing. You will not be disappointed.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yes, and top
Tap
the
the
like
like button. Like and subscribe to this channel if you have not
button.
already.
Please, thank you. Thank you, Rena Melanie. Sometimes I forget, like, it's just so wonderful to celebrate everybody who comes on here, and I forget. So, yes, please, like, tap the like button, subscribe, so you never miss an episode. Please share with anybody who may not have been able to join today. You can tune in. There will be an automatic replay for this. But thank you so much for tuning in, everyone, now and later. And thank you, Leslye, for being on here. I think I'm going to get off of here and probably start Savage City.
Yay. Well, thank you, Montrez. I really appreciate it. And everyone who came and everyone who's watching, I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and tune in next time. Happy reading, everybody.